Let's talk about Mercury in the 12th house, also in all 12 zodiac signs. So Mercury in the 12th in Aries, Mercury in the 12th in Taurus, Mercury in the 12th in Gemini, etc. Let's start with a review of the 12th house. What is it? It's the part of the sky that is right above the eastern horizon. So it represents the wind and the rain and the weather that erodes or evaporates things from the eastern horizon. So the eastern horizon symbolizes the sunrise or visibility. And that's why the 12th house is all about things that are detract from visibility. So it's the house of invisibility and invisible things. That means abstract things, unreal things, fantasy things, spiritual things, psychological things. This is why it's a house of the unknown, because the things we can't see, they're difficult to know about. So it has to do with alien things, foreign things, confusing things. And it's the house of decline, because it's like the erosion, the evaporation of things. So it has to do with expense, loss of money, loss of energy. The sunrise also symbolizes the appearance of the self, because the sun symbolizes the self. And so since the 12th house is above the sunrise or eroding the sunrise, it symbolizes reduction of self. So it's the house of humility, where the self becomes less visible. So it also has to do with isolation or alienation. It's the house of enemies or people who subtract from you. So it has to do with detractors and critics. And it's the house of weakness, losing your own strength. So it has to do with fatigue or retirement or retiring from an endeavor, giving up on things. That's the 12th house. Now, to understand Mercury in the 12th house, let's take a step forward and review what Mercury represents. Mercury is the planet of intellect, and intellect has to do with codes. This is why Mercury symbolizes communication, the ability to put information into codes that are transmissible. So it has to do with languages, maths, and any kind of symbolic system. Mercury is the planet of interaction, because that's what you do with these symbols, you exchange them. Mercury is the planet of relationship, because the people that you interact with are the ones you establish relationships with. So it has to do with friendship and partnership. And Mercury is the planet of recreation, because that's what happens in friendships. So Mercury is a recreational planet, and it therefore has a character of being witty, funny, fun, youthful. Intellect also has to do with recognizing patterns. So Mercury is the planet for learning, the ability to decode something. Mercury is the planet of organization, because organization means how well you store your patterns and how well you deal with patterns and how well you put things in patterns. So Mercury has to do with efficiency and neatness, because it's the planet of organization. It's also the planet of symmetry, because that's basically what organization is, a balance between things. So it has to do with balance, symmetry, and therefore beauty. And dexterity, because dexterity is a result of balance. And so Mercury is a very expert or delicate or refined planet. Now that we've reviewed the 12th house and Mercury, we're ready to take the next step and ask ourselves, what does Mercury look like when it's in the 12th house? To do that step, all you need to do is take Mercury symbolisms and put them next to the 12th house symbolisms and see where they connect. For example, Mercury represents friendships, but the 12th house represents enemies. Mercury represents interaction, but the 12th house represents isolation. Mercury represents learning, but the 12th house represents the unknown. And Mercury represents youth, but the 12th house represents fatigue and retirement and old age. So now what we want to do is unpack these seeds of the interpretation to see what they look like theoretically for Mercury in the 12th house. And then we'll take a further step and ask, what if this 12th house is Aries? Or what if it's Taurus? So first, let's unpack these seeds. So Mercury symbolizes friendship and the 12th house symbolizes enemies. So what does that mean? That means the person with Mercury in the 12th house tends to be, let's say, unfriended or non-integrated. They have some challenges in how well they relate to the people around them. They have some challenges in dealing with friends and partnerships. Mercury represents interaction. The 12th house represents isolation. So what does that mean? It means the person is not really efficient. So they will tend to make mistakes or blunder things, falter in what they're doing. So far it doesn't sound so great, does it? Well, no, it's the 12th house, so what do you expect? Planets don't tend to do well in the 12th house. But don't forget, we're going to look at Mercury in each particular sign in the 12th house. And we'll look at some people who actually have Mercury in the 12th house. And we'll see how this theoretical interpretation actually plays out in 12 actual cases. So to continue, Mercury has to do with learning, and the 12th house has to do with the unknown. So this symbolizes an inability to learn, or a lack of interest in learning, or an uneducated nature, or a type of knowledge which is not particularly practical. Some highly theoretical or highly abstract knowledge. Mercury represents youth, and the 12th house represents fatigue or old age. So Mercury in the 12th house is sort of lethargic or lazy, in that they tend to rely on other people. So again, it's not so, rosy looking, Mercury in the 12th house, but no planet in the 12th house is particularly rosy looking. And that's just one of the paints that the artist of the astrological chart is supplying. You have to mix all these paints on the whole canvas of the whole chart to understand what it means. So let's do that next. Let's take a look at Mercury in Aries in the 12th house. So what happens here is now Mercury is the second lord and the fifth lord. And these two houses are both intelligent houses and knowledgeable houses. So Mercury in this ascendant, in this Taurus ascendant, being in Aries in the 12th house, is very smart. So it will be very more resistant to the implication of Mercury in the 12th house lacking education. It will be more likely that it is theoretical knowledge or abstract knowledge. So in fact, we would interpret it like that. Intellect is abstract and conceptual, not so practical, but it's bold at the same time and different and kind of in the vanguard or unique. So these are unique theoretical thinkers. For example, have a look at Immanuel Kant, a very, very important theologian and philosopher and thinker. So I don't want to make the video 12 hours long. So you could just look at the bullet points to see what the salient features in his chart that really prevent Mercury in the 12th house from implying a lack of intelligence. So real quickly, his third and his fifth lords join. His first lord is in the second, Gemini. His Jupiter is in the 10th. His ninth lord is in the 9th. And his 12th house is in exchange with the third. Now let's look at Mercury in Taurus, 12th house. So in this case, the ascendant is Gemini. So Mercury is the first and the fourth lord. Being the first lord, it has a lot to do with practicality. But being the fourth lord has a lot to do with theoretical things. And so Gemini, by its nature, is kind of in this dualistic state between tangible and intangible, mind and body, practical and impractical. So that's going to be exacerbated by Mercury being in Taurus, the 12th house. So we would describe this as intellect, which is impractical but fertile. So putting that together, it would mean Mercury in Taurus, 12th house, is particularly imaginative. For example, Orson Welles. And you can check all these bullet points to see why he's so creative and so imaginative. For example, his 5th and his 11th lords join in the 11th house. His Jupiter is in the 12th house in Pisces. His 9th lord is in the 1st in Gemini. And by the way, he's really well known for having a big resonant voice. So his Jupiter is aspecting his 2nd house exactly from Pisces, while the 2nd lord is in the 9th house and Mercury is in Taurus. Now let's look into Mercury in Gemini in the 12th house. So this would be for Cancer ascendants. In this case, Mercury becomes the 3rd and the 12th lord. So it's going to be domicile here in the 12th house. So none of the negative permutations are particularly likely anymore, especially lethargic is less likely because it's the 3rd lord. So we're going to have an active intellect, but one which is fantastical or fantasy-oriented, yet quite articulate. For example, Angelina Jolie has Mercury in the 12th house in Gemini. An actress, a very articulate yet fantasy-oriented person. And you can check the bullet points to see what it is about this specific chart that really brings that all the way out. 5th and 11th lords join in the 11th house. Her Mars is great. And that's particularly why she's very energetic. And why she's so beautiful and well known as kind of a sex symbol. Well, Venus, the 11th lord, is right on the ascendant with a Pisces Navamsha. Now, how about Mercury in Cancer in the 12th house? This would be for Leo ascendant. So in this case, Mercury becomes the 2nd and the 11th lord. So this has to do with education and also friendships, especially friendships. And it's for a Leo ascendant where the people tend to be, therefore, as a result of Leo rising, kind of self-oriented. So this Mercury in the 12th house particularly highlights the social challenges and kind of also puts a highlight on the educational challenges of Mercury in the 12th. So Mercury in 12th house Cancer is very opinionated in its intellect and its opinions of things. And its decision-making process is very influenced by its opinions. Yet it's not so easy for this person to articulate their opinions in a way that others can predict, understand, anticipate. So the interaction with each other, with other people, becomes very challenging. A good example of Mercury in the 12th house in Cancer is Donald Trump. Really confrontational in his highly opinionated speech. Also not a great businessman. A failure in business who just has a lot of money to fail with, but who actually became more successful, not as a businessman, but as a personality. So in his case, his Leo and Mars ascending really highlight the selfish nature, and the self-strength, the ability to become famous for who he is. Now let's take a look at Mercury and Leo in the 12th house. Now this is for the Virgo ascendant. So again, Mercury is the 1st lord and now it's the 10th lord. So this is also going to highlight the social challenges that Mercury is implicated in by being in the 12th house. So it's a sense here, Mercury in Leo is a sense of, I don't belong with these people. I'm an alien. The intellect, therefore, is going to be exotic and self-developed. An example of somebody with Mercury in the 12th house Leo is Ernest Hemingway. And now he has Mars in the 1st, so his I don't belong with these people kind of translates into I am me. I am me. I am not my group. Why is he such a great writer? It's really because of his 3rd lord being in the 1st, 11th lord being in the 5th, and the 9th lord Venus being in the 11th. Now let's have a look at Mercury in Virgo, the 12th house. So now, again, Mercury is domicile as the 12th lord and also as the 9th lord. So this makes it a little bit more risky to the uneducated potential of Mercury in the 12th house, but it fortifies the sense of morality or goodness. So here we would say this intellect is humble, but it's prudent and thorough. So it's quiet but patient intellect. An example of somebody with Mercury in the 12th house, Virgo, is Jimmy Carter. Now, why was he the president of the United States? There's a lot of things in his chart. So first of all, his first lord and his 11th lord exchange for Nichbhanga. So that makes a very strong self. Then he has three really important Raja Yogas. 10th Lord Moon and 5th Lord Saturn joined for Raja Yoga. 7th Lord Mars is with Ketu in the 5th for a second Raja Yoga, and the 5th and 2nd exchange for a Raja Yoga. Now, how about Mercury in Libra in the 12th house? So now Mercury is the 8th Lord and the 11th Lord. So for a Scorpio ascendant, Mercury has a sexual flavor to it because of being both the 11th and the 8th Lord. That's why Scorpio is known as a sexy sign, because its intellect is disposed towards that. What that does by putting Mercury now in the 12th means that sexuality becomes a bit challenging. The intellect itself is quite abstract, yet it's refined or artistic. An example of somebody with Mercury in Libra 12th house is Caitlyn/Bruce Jenner. And so the sexual challenges inherent here get highlighted particularly for this individual because Mercury is very, very close to Ketu. And also this is a very successful individual, and that's because the first Lord Mars is with the 4th Lord Saturn in the 11th house. How about Mercury in Scorpio 12th house? Now Mercury is the 10th and 7th Lord. So there's a synergy going on here with the movement houses and the foreign houses, 12, 7, 10. So Mercury in Scorpio 12th house inclines a person to be very international. The intellect, again, is going to be fantastical in a mysterious way or mystical way. An example of such a person is Joe Biden. So his Mercury in the 12th house in Scorpio joins the 5th Lord and 12th Lord Mars and the 4th Lord. So it's creating a lot of Raja Yogas, and it's with the domicile planet. So he's not uneducated, but he doesn't come across as particularly articulate or educated, does he? In addition, he has a Viparit Raja Yoga as well, by the 6th Lord, Venus being in the 12th house, so that indicates he's not easy to defeat. But most of all, his first Lord Jupiter is exalted, and it aspects those 4 planets in the 12th house. And its Lord, the Moon, is also exalted. So he's a very prominent, very, very prominent individual. Now let's have a look at Mercury in Sagittarius in the 12th house. Now Mercury is the 9th and the 6th Lord. So it's going to be less lethargic and more aggressive. The intellect will be abstract yet ambitious. An example of this is Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King also has Uttarashada ascending, so these people tend to be indomitable. She has the 4th Lord Mars with the 1st Lord Saturn in Raja Yoga in the 6th house for athletics and competitiveness, and opposite the 6th Lord Mercury. And she has the 5th and 10th Lord Venus with the 7th Lord Moon in the 10th house. How about Mercury in Capricorn in the 12th house? Now this Mercury is the 5th and 8th Lord. So again, this, like when Mercury is the 8th and 11th, when it's the 8th and the 5th, it also has a sexuality to it. So it being in the 12th house is going to highlight the interaction issues in a sexual way, especially because Aquarius is the ascendant. So it'll be like the person can't interact with anybody in a way that isn't at least subliminally sexual. And the impracticality of Mercury in the 12th house tends to become more mysterious, or mystical, because now Mercury is the 8th lord and the 5th lord. So they don't seem unintelligent, but they seem mystifying or incomprehensible. So you get an intellect which is mystifying or mystical, but it's tangible or definite. So it's expressing itself, but it's expressing such mysterious things. An example is Jim Morrison. So he's particularly wordy and particularly intellectual. First Lord Saturn plus the 10th Lord Mars, both in the 5th house, while Jupiter aspects the ascendant. 5th and 12th houses exchange. The moon is exalted, the 7th and the 11th houses also exchange, and the 3rd Lord is in the 5th house aspecting the 11th. And just to top off his mysteriousness and make the mystique be a very obvious thing about him, is Ketu is ascending. Mercury in Aquarius in the 12th house. Now Mercury is the 4th and 7th. Again, this has to do with being more international, but it's a little bit like conflicted in the nationality, the patriotism, and the conflicted in the allegiances, political allegiances, yet more capable with abstract things, because that's something that 7 and 4 have in common. So this Mercury in the 12th house is not likely to be uneducated at all. It's very likely to be very abstract in its thinking. Yet, because it's in Aquarius, it's very syncretic. So it's syncretically abstract. An example of such a person who might not really be well known to many people is Hans Georg Gadamer, who is an important philosopher for hermeneutics, or the way that language supplies meaning and how to derive meaning from language. It's not just that his Mercury in the 12th is in Aquarius. There's many things in this chart which make this person outstandingly intelligent. Exalted Venus, domicile Saturn, domicile Jupiter, and domicile Moon, for example. Finally, let's wrap it up by looking at Mercury in the 12th sign, Pisces, in the 12th house. So this is for an Aries ascendant. Mercury now is the 3rd and the 6th lords. So it has a lot to do with the drives, but it's in Pisces, so it's debilitated. So it's more likely to indicate this lethargy. And the intellect here, however, is very fantastical and imaginative again. So an example of somebody with Mercury in Pisces 12th house is Ron Howard. He's particularly successful with Mercury in the 12th house Pisces because his 3rd and his 12th houses are in exchange, while his 1st Lord Mars is in the Sagittarius 9th house. Look how much fire there is. And the 1st Lord is Mars in Sagittarius, and his Mercury is right in the heart of the sun. So he's very fire infused. So the potential of lethargy for Mercury in the 12th house Pisces is diminished, which leaves the potential for fertile imagination. And that indeed is what comes through for him, especially with his moon being very close to Rahu. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, Your Nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. And the newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tarahabala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.